Entering the Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience presented by Underdog. This is the Week 9 weekend update. Updated rankings, injury report, underdog picks, and some DraftKings ownership and pivot plays. As always, hit the show notes. You can jump to the time codes that you want to figure out what's going on. If you want the cheat sheet, you can hit the description right now, find all the information down there, and all the rankings will be updated in the newsletter post that comes out on Saturday evening. They're updated in the previous newsletter post as well if you're looking for a quick cheat sheet for all of the positional rankings this week. Sub to that for free, by the way. Smash like, sub to the channel while you're here, and let's get into it. Let's rock with the running back injuries to start everything off. The two big ones that I'm looking at right now, Tony Pollard is a game time decision for the Tennessee Titans as favorites against the New England Patriots. Tyjae Spears has been ruled out for that game. Pollard didn't practice all week. Now, normally this would indicate that he is not playing on Sunday, and I get the sneaking suspicion that he isn't going to play, but as of right now, they're holding out hope that he can go. So I still have Pollard in at number 17 in the rankings, with Julian Chestnut, Joey's brother, in at number 39. But here's the thing. If Pollard was to be declared out, and it's an early game, so you'll know that before lineups actually lock, Chestnut would move up to number 16 in the running back rankings as the primary back as a favorite against a bad Patriots run defense. Now, when we get to the DraftKings section a little bit later on, you'll see that he is a very respectable price. Expect him to go through the roof in terms of ownership, but not as much because it's happened so much later in the week. And again, we're likely not going to know. Rappaport or Schefter will probably have this information overnight, but again, we still have to wait out one way or another, and just that extra time means he's not going to balloon up to 30%, but there's very few 4,000 range running backs that you can use on DraftKings ever at this point, and Chestnut would become one of them in this instance. So Zamir White for the Raiders is a game time decision. It doesn't really matter for him in terms of playing Zamir White. You don't want to play him either way, but if he is out, just more touches for Alexander Madison. He is number 23 in the running back rankings as severe underdogs against the Bengals, but still a pretty soft run defense that you can go against. Madison, a pretty decent play if you're in a pinch. On the other side of the ball, Zach Moss and his neck injury has been declared out for this game. So Chase Brown moves from the low 20s up to number 15 in the running back rankings this week. He's a very good play on DraftKings as well at $5,900. He could, outside of Alvin Kamara, who projects to be the highest owned on DraftKings right now, Chase Brown could be a second depending on where Chestnut ends up coming in if Pollard ends up out. But Brown at 16 is a very good play as big favorites, and he's been controlling the majority of the carries on the ground anyway with Zach Moss still, and now you can see an uptick in his receiving total as well if that game ends up tightening a little bit as well. Kendry Miller and Jamal Williams are both out for the Saints. That means Jordan Mims will likely be activated to be the primary backup to Alvin Kamara. Kamara up to number 3 in the running back rankings this week against the Carolina Panthers. I did bump up Taysom Hill at tight end as well because there's always the chance that he ends up stealing those touchdowns, hence why Kamara isn't number 1 in the running back rankings. Previously, Joe Mixon had been number 1 in the running back rankings, and his first half would lead you to believe he would have had 500 yards in that game. Then stuff happened. It didn't end up working out that way. But Kamara, number 3 in the current running back rankings. Mims would come in at number 54. Taysom Hill, number 12 in the tight end rankings. Derek Carr expected to be back, starting under center for the New Orleans Saints as well. Bryce Young starting on the other side of the ball. Andy Dalton healthy enough to play, but still being benched with that thumb injury. Jonathan Brooks is expected to not play, yet still be activated so they can use him the rest of the season. They go to Munich next week to play the Giants, and then they have a bye week. So I wouldn't anticipate seeing Brooks until week 12 at this point. Maybe they activate him for the Munich game, but that would just seem weird at this point, considering he's probably healthy enough to play. They just want to give him enough time. So Chuba Hubbard remains the primary back in Carolina, at least for this week, maybe next week as well, so you can squeeze that much more value out of him at this point. I mean, he's been good for you. If you picked him up as a 12th round pick, you've basically been able to play him from weeks 3 till now, and he's been pretty good. He's number 22 in the running back rankings. For Baltimore, Keaton Mitchell is leaning out some more. It's unaffected for Derrick Henry, but for Justice Hill, it's another week where maybe as a flex play. Not probably a great spot against the Broncos here, but just keep an eye on that. And when Mitchell ends up coming back, it's just more guys on Baltimore to potentially steal upside from the main cogs that we want. So does that mean, 2 fewer touches for Derrick Henry? Sure, but it also could mean Keaton Mitchell takes one from the 30-yard line and scores, thus limiting the touchdown upside of both Lamar and Derrick Henry. It's just not a fun circumstance to be in when you get a high impact speed player like this back in an offense that's already very good. We saw him score some long touchdowns already last season, so it's not that you want to pick up and play Keaton Mitchell. I mean, I'd probably put him on my bench over Justice Hill at this point should anything happen to Derrick Henry, but just the overall limitations. If it was going to be a 10 out of 10, then maybe it's now a 9 out of 10 for Henry and Lamar, just based on that potential. If he plays, maybe he doesn't end up suiting up this week, but he'll be back soon enough for the Ravens. Jerome Ford is going to be in for the Browns against the Chargers. I'm not too concerned about that for Nick Chubb. In a close game, he's going to handle the vast majority of the work on the ground. It's not like he had receiving upside to begin with, but lucky Pierre Strong now gets bumped back down the rankings. Ford will reemerge in that receiving role and probably take a few carries away from Nick Chubb, but I'm not too worried about that. Tank Bigsby is questionable for the Jags against the Eagles with an ankle injury. Travis Etienne is a game-time decision. I would expect both those guys to end up suiting up. Bigsby currently number 28 in the rankings, Etienne number 34. With Etienne back, assuming he is fully healthy at some point here in the near future, I do think that he reestablishes himself as probably the best fantasy running back the majority of the time on Jacksonville. And they're giant underdogs in a lot of these games. But once they start playing more teams in the AFC South again, they're going to have a chance to run the ball a little bit more. I don't think that, I just believe that the rumors of Etienne's demise are a bit quick. He's been injured. Maybe that's the reason he's been so bad. I don't think that he gets back to his 20 carries a game and all the goal line work. That's just not going to happen. But they might just eats up. They're like the snake that eats its own tail. That's not Cerberus. Cerberus? My Greek mythology is not good, so don't even worry about that. But if you can buy low on him for free at this point, I mean, people are actively trying to give away Travis Etienne. There still is some upside there. And if anything happens to Bigsby, then all of a sudden he's going to be good again. So if you can get him for pennies on the dollar and put him on your bench, that's what I would suggest doing at this point. Tyrone Tracy, I expected to miss the Washington game because of a concussion. He has cleared concussion protocol. He is going to play. He's running back number 21 for the week. The potential for re-aggravation of another brain injury is still pretty high, and they're pretty big underdogs, 3.5 points, 4 points, wherever you look, to Washington right now. But if you want to beat Washington, it's on the ground. He's been fed the ball and looked great recently, even since Singletary has come back. Singletary moves down to number 37 in the running back rankings. Brian Robinson is expected to play, but he does have a hamstring injury. We have not seen a clean bill of health from him in a while. He's running back 18. Eckler is running back number 31 against the Giants and a weak run defense. We saw Najee and Warren both do some pretty good damage on the ground against them on Monday Night Football, so be on the lookout for that. In that game is one of my favorite underdog plays of the week, by the way. It is Malik Neighbors higher than 12 fantasy points in that game. His higher and lower for receptions in the game is 6.5. You think he breaks one of them for at least 20 yards. So if he can get like 6 for 80, all of a sudden, 6 for 80, does that work out? 3? No, that wouldn't work out. We need 6 for 90, or we need like 8 for 80 would be pretty good in that spot to get him higher than the number. If he scores a touchdown, you are there. But that's where this offense is going to go. They're going to try to feed Neighbors as much as possible. Rico Dowdle is expected in with his illness, so he should reclaim. I'm putting it there. He's only had double-digit carries twice in his career, or twice so far this season, and they are underdogs against Atlanta on the fast track. I have him at number 26 in the running back ranking. So that's where we're looking for the running backs this week. You can check out the description and the show notes for the updated rankings. And once again, sub to the Mayo Media newsletter for free. Get sent directly to your inbox on Saturday evening with all of the pertinent info and updated injuries and rankings as well. Wide receiver injuries to look out for. Amari Cooper's a game-time decision, and it doesn't seem like Curtis Samuel is going to play. Not that you care about Curtis Samuel, but I have Cooper still in the rankings right now. It's not going to affect anyone at the high end if Cooper doesn't play. You'll see Mac Hollins get worked in, MVS get worked in, and if Cooper does play, those guys are irrelevant. They're kind of irrelevant anyway unless you're playing anytime touchdowns. But I have Shakir at number 20 in the wide receiver rankings and Coleman at number 26 against the Dolphins this week. Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis are both game time decisions for the Jacksonville Jaguars. It does seem like Davis has a better chance to play than Brian Thomas, but if Brian Thomas ends up playing, you play him. That's just the way that it works, especially with Christian Kirk now out for the year. Parker Washington would be the one I'd be looking out for. I think that he takes the Christian Kirk role, which is pretty valuable in this offense week to week. We'll see if Parker Washington gets his chance, but he's number 48 in the wide receiver rankings, and that assumes that Gabe Davis is going to play, which I do think that he ends up going. He's been playing through a lot of these injuries anyway. He's number 38 in the wide receiver rankings. Should Gabe Davis sit, I just switched the spots. I'd move Parker up to number 38, and obviously someone from down the list would move up, but you probably don't want to play that many guys against the Eagles secondary anyway, as this Fangio defense has started to come around over the past few weeks. Once their offense got back to full health and can sustain a few drives, the defense started looking an awful lot better for the Eagles. T. Higgins and his quad is not expected to play in this game. I think this helps out Mike Gesicki more than it helps out Andre Yoshevas and Jermaine Burton. Jamar Chase is number 1 in the wide receiver rankings this week. Burrow is a fine play as big favorites. Chase Brown, as talked about earlier, also a really good play against the Raiders, but Yoshevas is kind of touchdown or bust at this point. They don't give him a ton of volume, so you can throw the prayer that he ends up scoring once or twice and he's looking great, but instead I would just have Gesicki moved up. He is inside the top 10 of tight ends for me this week. He's another underdog play when we get to those a little bit later that I like. You can go, I think it's higher than 2.5 receptions or higher than 31.5 yards. I like the higher of 31.5 yards for Gesicki this week. No, it's 3.5 receptions. That's why if it was 2.5, I would have taken the higher pretty quickly. It's 34.5 in terms of receiving yards. I'm going higher than that. Juju is expected out for the Kansas City Chiefs. Worthy at 21, Hopkins at number 30, Kelsey the number 1 tight end, DK Metcalf going to be out for the Seattle Seahawks, as is Noah Fant for the Seahawks against the Rams as underdogs at home in this game. JSN is number 23 in the wide receiver rankings, Lockett number 26. Flip a coin between those guys to see who has the big day. Bobo comes in at number 58. Maybe he should be higher. I just don't have a ton of trust in Bobo, especially with Noah Fant out in this game, because I really have no idea where it's going to go in the tight end position. Maybe they just run more 3 wide and use more Bobo with Fant. Fant sucked up an awful lot of targets last week, that maybe those get shelled out a little bit more to Bobo, Lockett, and JSN. That's the hope, anyway, for the Seahawks in this game. Bub Means is going to be out for the New Orleans Saints, so Olave comes in at number 11 in the wide receiver rankings, coming off the concussion. Always worried about him sustaining another concussion, because he leads with his head a lot of the times after he catches the ball. Tipton moves up to number 56 in the wide receiver rankings. He also makes the list as someone I like for underdog plays this week of higher than 2.5 receptions, and his yardage total is pretty good as big favorites. And with Derek Carr back, you have guys that can actually throw him the ball, which is always a nice out. It's not Rattlers just running around in circles and chucking it wherever. No, the ball might actually go to the receivers this week with Derek Carr returning. Sterling Shepard is expected to be out for Tampa Bay against the Chiefs, and that moves Jalen McMillan to number 40 in the wide receiver rankings, Trey Palmer to number 44 in the catch-up spot, presumably, and maybe the Bucs jump out to a big lead. And if they do that, then maybe these guys were actually helping. Otten and White are probably the two. Otten's the only guy on Tampa you really is a must-play this week at tight end. White is the highest ranked of the running backs. It's White, then Irving, then a drop-off to Sean Tucker, and you would expect them to do better in PPR formats than anything else, because most of their damage will be done through the receiving game this week. Jamison Williams, in his PED suspension, is serving game 2 of 2. He'll return next week, but he is out. Hard to say. We didn't really get much intel on what's going to happen with the Lions offense receiving wise, because they just beat up on the Titans so badly last week that we didn't get a good sense of how that flow is going to go. I still think it would be Tim Patrick over Raymond and Allen Robinson, but that's just a guess. I probably wouldn't play any of these guys this week if you don't have to. Adam Thielen going to be out for Carolina. Xavier Legette is 35 in the wide receiver rankings against the Saints, who are beat up in the secondary pretty badly. No Latimer for sure, and we'll see what else ends up happening with their secondary. Jalen Coker at number 50 in the wide receiver rankings this week. Tyler Boyd is leaning out for the Tennessee Titans. Calvin Ridley is going to be in. Nick Westbrook-Ikena has shown some life with Mason Rudolph, but it's touchdown or bust for him. He's like the worst version of Yoshivas, so he's behind Yoshivas in the rankings. He's number 59 in the wide receiver rankings this week. Puka Nacua popped up again on the injury report with a knee injury. They say it's not that big of a deal. I am inclined to believe them, but who knows? Last week, he was supposed to be on a limited snap count, and he was. It's just every snap that he was on, they gave him the ball, and he absolutely smashed. So you have to play him if he's going to be active. He's been that good for your team. If he ends up getting hurt immediately, well, that sucks, and hopefully your team is good enough to overcome it. What else do we have here? Ladd McConkey, number 20 in the wide receiver rankings, and Quentin Johnston looks like he will be back in with his ankle injury. I have him at number 49 in the wide receiver rankings this week. He is $4,400 on DraftKings if you're looking for someone else cheap to pair up in that game with all of the cheaper Cleveland Brown options, which are going to be extremely popular, beat Elijah Moore or Cedric Tillman this week. At tight end, as mentioned before, Noah Fant is going to be out for the Seahawks. A.J. Burner and Pharaoh Brown are going to be the backups. You likely want nothing to do with those guys. Maybe one of them goes off. Couldn't tell you who. Couldn't tell you if these are the guys who are going to garner a target in this game. Again, Bobo would be my likely suggestion if you're looking for a deeper play. Obviously, he doesn't play tight end, but that's where I think that is going to go in terms of target share for the Seahawks. You don't need to be playing the third and second string Seahawks tight ends. Playing Noah Fant was like barely a thing. Playing his backups who might split time is definitely not a thing this week. Dallas Goedert going to be out again for the Eagles. Calcaterra, number 18 in the tight end rankings against Jacksonville. TJ Hawkinson will make his season debut on Sunday night against the Colts for the Vikings. First game back, he's tight end number 14. Definitely not a must start because you probably have better tight end options. I would play Taysom Hill over TJ Hawkinson this week, and I would play Mike Gesicki over him as well. And if Drake May plays, I would play Hunter Henry over him in this spot. Well, it's a wait and see. If you want to shoot for upside, sure, he's awesome when he's healthy. We'll see how he gets integrated into this offense now with both Naylor and Addison there, Jefferson soaking everything up, and a new quarterback who he's never played with before in Sam Darnold. Hayden Hurst is going to be in with his groin injury after missing the past 2 weeks for the Chargers. So Disley moves down from number 9 in the tight end rankings to number 24 in the tight end rankings. I would not play Will Disley with Hayden Hurst back on the field for the Chargers. At quarterback, few things. Jordan Love looks like he is leaning towards playing at this point with his groin injury. It didn't seem that way all week. I thought it was going to be Malik Willis, so all of the rankings are updated for the Packers receivers, running backs, and tight ends with Jordan Love in. I don't think Jordan Love is a must-start against the Lions. I have him at quarterback number 14, but I have Jalen Reed up to 16 in the wide receiver rankings, Romeo Doubs at number 24, Christian Watson at 43, and Wicks at number 56. Tucker Kraft moves to number 15 in the tight end rankings, just because I don't think that Jordan Love, like with the ranking, you do have to hedge a bit, at least in my mind, that he's going to try to force it. He's probably not going to have much mobility with this groin injury. That's what we saw before he left the game last week against Jacksonville. So he's probably not going to be playing at 100% here, which is probably not a great reason to play him. If you have better options, I would look in a different direction. But he's still Jordan Love. He still might throw 3 touchdowns, probably going to all of these guys. So you have to weigh the upside with the downside here. One bad hit, and he could be done for this game as well. So keep that in mind. Drake May is a game-time decision with his concussion. I would not think that he's playing. I have it ranked as if Brissett is playing right now. If we get word that May is going to play, I'll update those in the newsletter, and you can go click on the link down in the description right now and get that update as soon as all that information comes in. I'll update the new newsletter again on Saturday evening, send it right to you, and then if we get more information on Sunday morning, I'll update it again. Hunter Henry is really the only Patriot you want to play. If May plays, maybe you can play Demario Douglas, but that would probably be it for me. Will Levis is also a game time decision on the other side of the ball. I still think that Mason Rudolph is going to play. If Will Levis plays, drop down all of the Tennessee receiving options. I mean, basically drop down Calvin Ridley because he is the only guy from that offense that you're probably going to play, with Tyler Boyd likely to miss this game with a shoulder injury. Anthony Richardson not starting. Joe Flacco is starting. Downs is the look. Michael Pittman was removed from the injury report with his back problem, but he's just not looking right. He doesn't look 100%, so it's tough to play Michael Pittman right now. He's a low-end wide receiver 3 for me, where Josh Downs is a firm mid-range to high-end wide receiver 2 against the Vikings. Derek Carr is going to be in with his oblique injury after missing the past 3 weeks. For the Saints against the Panthers, no better spot to come back to than playing the Panthers. And Bryce Young will be starting on the other side of the ball instead of Andy Dalton, which does downgrade the receiving options for the Carolina Panthers this week. Underdog plays for week number 9. A reminder to all of you to use code Mayo right now at Underdog. Not only will you get a deposit bonus of up to $1,000, you'll also unlock a Jalen Hurts free pick for Sunday, which you can add to any of these, and you'll want to do that because, upping your odds is always a nice thing. And we got money to play with coming off a winner from Thursday Night Football. Won almost 6 times our money, which is always very nice. We came so close to cashing 2 20-1 entries last weekend. Missed one. I mean, if we played a flex play, we would have been winners. We didn't do that. We shot for the moon on this one. So I got 2 5-bangers for you this week. Here's what we're looking at. First one up is Khalil Shakir higher than 10.3 fantasy points against the Dolphins on the other side of the ball. I don't love Tyreek here. I mean, I like him enough. I think he's a decent fantasy play, but I have him as lower than 10.5 targets in this game. Mason Tipton, who I mentioned earlier, I have at 2.5 receptions. Let's take the higher on that against Carolina with Bub Means out. Kenneth Walker, I just go back to him every single week now that he's been used in the passing game so much. And against the Rams, they're going to want to slow the ball down a little bit. No DK. His touchdown potential is through the roof. 14.9 fantasy points in half-point PPR for Kenneth Walker. Get it going on the ground, score a touchdown. That should be enough. And then we always have the out of the receiving as well with K-Dub3, so higher than 14.9 fantasy points. And the one that lost us for us a week ago would have won 10 grand had he had lower than his target total, but I'm going back to the well again. CeeDee Lamb lower than 12.5 targets against the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons secondary is like the one bright spot on their defense, and we just saw, like, you can't just force feed Lamb the ball the entire time. You got to try to run the ball or use someone else in this offense, so it's tough to get 13 or more targets in a game, so I will go lower on his targets. Those 5 end up hitting, then boom, we've won 21.5 times our money. All right, so let's hope that one hits, and let's hope this one hits as well. Mike Gesicki, talked about him earlier, 34.5 higher receiving yards with T. Higgins likely to be out in this game and him used as the secondary option in this receiving game. Jerry Jeudy higher than 3.5 receptions for the Cleveland Browns. We forget that Judy's actually their best receiver. Not Tillman, not Moore. Those are just the guys who are cheaper or available on your fantasy football waiver wires. Jeudy is still their main guy. Malik Neighbors higher than 12.1 fantasy points, as discussed earlier. This is one I love, actually. Like, if you want to break these down and not play the fivers, this is one I would include for sure. Probably my favorite one, and you get inflated odds for it. It's 1.1x your money is Devin Achane, 4.5 receptions. Higher is big underdogs to the Bills, and this correlates pretty well with Tyreek Hill under targets as well. 7, 7, and 8 targets in the games that Tua has played so far this season for Achane. This is how they get him involved. If they fall behind, this is how they're going to use Achane. And then Chase Brown with no Zach Moss higher than 66.5 rushing yards. If those 5 hit, we win 20 times our money. So it'd be nice to win 20 and 20 on these. I also played a big 8-legger, but I'll include all of these into the Mayo Media newsletter if you want the links to tail them. If not, you can just see them right here. Use code Mayo, and you can add that Jalen Hurts free pick to any of these to double the odds of them, just like that. So I would recommend doing that all with code Mayo. That is how you support this show, is by going to Underdog, using code Mayo, and hey, let's try to win some money like we did on Thursday, okay? DraftKings picks for week number 9 if you're looking for pivots and ownership. The move is to check out the newsletter because I'll have the cheat sheet from Justin Freeman at Run the Sims in there when that ends up getting put out, and all the updates will end up happening. Because again, this Chestnut situation I think is the biggest development of the week for how people construct lineups. We take a look at Chestnut right now. Chestnut is, how much is he? 4,000. He's in the min at running back. he's a free square. You jam him. If Pollard doesn't play him. That's my entire take on it. Like, should be probably 50% owned. He won't be. He might not even crack 25%. And we'll see. In higher stakes, he'll end up being very high owned because people who are sharp tend to play in those a little bit more than the larger contests. But if Pollard is in, you probably don't want to play him anyway. But it does create some situations for this mid-tier where people might not go. So right now, Kamara projects as the highest owned running back. That shouldn't come as a shocker, especially with both of his backups out and Mims being someone we know relatively nothing about, but he might track around 30%. He has negative optimal leverage this week. If you want to fade anyone, it's probably him. It might not be a good fade. He might score 30 DraftKings points, but if everyone is going to him, there are better options that you can use. And if Chestnut ends up in as a big play, you're going to see a lot of Kamara, Chase Brown, and Chestnut lineups. 2 of those 3 or all 3 of those. So trying to get different there is where the pivots would end up coming in. DeAndre Swift would probably lose a lot of his ownership. He projected for second before all this news came out. And Tyron Tracy would be one at $5,500 if you're looking for a cheap running back. Nick Chubb, Tyron Tracy, and Alexander Mattison in the $5,000 range instead of going to Chase Brown. I don't love it. I objectively like Chase Brown more than those guys, but if he's going to be 3 to 4 times at minimum all of their ownerships, then all of a sudden they're cheaper and they're slightly worse plays. That doesn't mean they can't have better weeks, put it that way. Especially Tracy, if they just go big on the ground with him coming off the concussion to try to keep it close against Washington, then all of a sudden at 5,500, he ends up becoming a great play. If you're looking at who the lower owned higher options are going to be, under sub 5% right now, you're looking at James Cook, you're looking at Saquon Barkley, and you're looking at Derrick Henry. So if you really do want to pivot, so that's why I don't love Alvin Kamara as much as everyone else, because Kamara's 7,800, those guys are slightly more expensive, but they have basically the same upside. They don't have as good of a matchup, obviously. They have worse matchups. That would be the problem here, and everyone's just so scared of Saquon Barkley after Jalen Hurts stole 3 of his touchdowns a week ago. Well, maybe that doesn't happen. It reverts back to what we saw earlier on in the season. Barkley just goes mental on these guys, and you're getting him at 1/9 the ownership of Alvin Kamara. Like, this is the whole game here. This is the game theory play to play Saquon Barkley. I mentioned A-Chain earlier. He is trending at right around 10%. James Cook at 2% is also a pretty good play. We saw him demolish the Dolphins in Miami earlier on this season, coming off a really big week anyway, and he's only $7,200. Those would be my favorite pivots at running back this week, because I'm good with playing Chase Brown at chalk. I'm good with playing Chestnut if he emerges as the guy as chalk. Then where do I get different? I don't want to have the same running backs as everyone else. If everyone is going to Kamara, or at least like 30%-ish are going to Kamara, which makes it a lot easier with Chestnut too, when you're saving all of that money, then all of a sudden these are the guys that you want to target to get a little bit different. And even going Cook and A-Chain in that game is how I've actually started some of my lineups as well. So that's a factor that you can place in for running back this week. At wide receiver, I mean, obviously, a lot of this is going to be determined by the stacks, but Malik Neighbors, just objectively, projections love him this week. I like him this week. 21% owned. Ladd McConkey at $5,600 is 20% owned. Drake London, Jacoby Myers, Chris Olave, Amon-Ra are all in that same sort of area. But if you're looking for the cheaper guys who project out really well and will have ownership come along with him, Cedric Tillman is one of them. I mean, he was the big play. We used him on Underdog, on DraftKings last week. He won us a bunch of money. It's not that I don't like him this week. I just don't love him if he's going to get around like 15% ownership at $4,300. There's a chance that because if the Chestnut Square opens up at 4,000, you might see fewer DraftKings players go to these low-end receivers and use that money to pay up a little bit elsewhere, or they use Chestnut and one of these cheap guys and just have as much money as they want to get in the more expensive stacks. But Ray McLeod, Tillman, Jalen Coker would be the ones that people are looking at from the lower end who are garnering some ownership right now. Elijah Moore on the Browns is another one. So I like Jerry Jeudy as a pivot play off those guys. It's not a 1v1 pivot because he's $1,000 more expensive. But that'd be the route that I'd be looking at if I wanted to play a lot of Browns. Tambo and I talked through a Cleveland stack on the Friday show, if you want to go check that out. Also, tambostidbits.com. He's launching a new site. I'm not exactly sure. He went over a little bit. It's going to be a surprise to everyone. It's free to join. You can go sign up with an email right now at tambostidbits.com. Go help out our guy Tambo and get that going, all right? Tight ends for the week. I already mentioned how much I like Mike Gesicki, but Grant Calcaterra is the one who kind of pops off again. It was going to be Will Disley, but obviously the return of Hayden Hurst threw a lot of cold water on that, and all that money is now going to Calcaterra. So Calcaterra, Theo Johnson, Jake Ferguson are the three that project out the highest right now, but Theo Johnson and Calcaterra is price only. Again, if people are able to save money with Chestnut at 4,000, you might see the ownership on these guys get pushed down a little bit. It could be the week of the high-end tight end, but right now I'm seeing Mike Gesicki come in around 2% ownership at $3,100. If I'm going to plant a flag at a onesie position, that is what I want to do this week at tight end. Defense-wise, I believe it is the Broncos. Yeah, 2,700. People are using the Raiders at 2,400 and then Jacksonville at 2,300. It seems like a vast majority of players are looking to save their money at defense this week, but you don't necessarily need to do that. You're looking for high upside, pass attempts against, and lower ownership, and I can see it right now. The Lions at 1% ownership coming in at $3,600. Yeah, they're expensive, but hey, Washington at 1% against Daniel Jones, a terrible offensive line with great pressure. That's my favorite defense of the week. If you can get to them at $3,400, if not them, a 2% Tennessee Titans against either Brissett or Drake Maye. That works for me if you want to pay up a little bit to get into those spots. Those are my three favorite pay up defenses, and they're not wildly expensive. You can afford them in your lineups this week. Again, the cheat sheet will be available with all of the best projected simulated plays in the newsletter this evening. So you go subscribe for free. All right, it's down in the description right now. Stack-wise, it doesn't seem like there's one stack to rule them all at all this week. Daniel Jones is going to be pretty highly owned, it looks like, just because he's so cheap, and that correlates with Malik Neighbors as well. Dak Prescott, Jaden Daniels, Geno Smith. Geno with JSN and Lockett looks like it's a pretty cheap stack that you can go with because Geno's only $5,800. Makes a ton of sense to me. You could use Jameis. We built out those stacks. I like Kirk Cousins a lot on the other side versus Dak Prescott. If you can pick right with his receiving options, that's the way that I would go. But there's a lot of very high-end quarterbacks this week who just aren't being stacked up. Like, for example, Josh Allen is going to be like 3% owned, and he absolutely crushes. The Bills absolutely crush the Dolphins every time. It's hard to know who to pair him up with. I'd probably take Shakir, maybe, but maybe even just Josh Allen by himself could be good enough. Joe Burrow at 5%. I mean, his stack is pretty easy. You just go, and it gets you off of Chase Brown as well, because you probably wouldn't put him in. You go Gesicki, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow. It's more expensive, but I already talked about multiple ways where you can save money this week. Kirk Cousins, again, 2% is a pretty good option. I also like Caleb Williams a lot at $6,100 at 1% ownership. You don't need to go like full-blown stack. You could use a Dunze with him. You could use DJ Moore with him. You could throw Komet in with him if you wanted to. But DeAndre Swift projects to be pretty highly owned at running back. No one's using Caleb Williams, and we do know that Arizona generates very little pass rush, and that was the whole reason to fade Caleb Williams last week against Washington, is that they generate so much pressure, and Caleb Williams has been terrible under pressure and under duress so far this year. Arizona's just not likely to generate that against him. In those games, Caleb Williams has been a fantasy goldmine, so go check him out this week. Again, even on Underdog, his higher on fantasy points is a route that I would be looking this week for Caleb Williams. If you want the full recap, the cheat sheet, everything, hit the description for the Mayo Media newsletter. Smash likes out of the channel while you are here. And boom, that will do it for me. Everyone have a profitable week 9, and I'll see you on Sunday night with me, Cust and Garion, 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time, live on Mayo Media Network. You be there, okay?
Mayo experience! Experience!